Hello, everyone in the US, Israel, and Palestine, and other places in the world. Welcome to the latest in Partners for Progressive Israel's webinar series, Conversations with Israel and Palestine. My name is Karen Shapiro, and I'm the Vice President of Partners for Progressive Israel. Before I hand it over to today's discussion moderator, Partners Board Member Avraham Spraragen, let me note that Partners for Progressive Israel is an American not-for-profit dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors, which requires an end to Israel's occupation and a recognition of the right to national self-determination of both peoples in the land. Partners supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equal rights for all of Israel's inhabitants. The organization wishes to deepen Americans' understanding of Israel's and Palestine's complexities so that they can better advocate for a progressive future for all of the inhabitants of the region. Partners is glad to be bringing this webinar to you for free. If you appreciate it and want more programming like this, please visit progressiveisrael.org and make your contribution today. Before we get going, I first of all want to wish an Eid Mubarak, a blessed Eid to all who are celebrating. And one quick note about our upcoming programming. On Sunday, June 7th, we will be holding the 5th and 6th sessions of our Israel-Palestine virtual symposium entitled Israel in Moral Crisis. Each session is standalone, and there's no need to have attended earlier sessions to take part. Session 5, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, will look at the upcoming Israeli elections and feature Avi Dabush and Laura Wharton. Session 6, starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, will discuss the moral challenges of state power, and panelists will include Rabbi Leah Shaktiel and Rabbi Amichai Laolavi. We also have in-person programming coming up in New York and Washington, D.C., and we'll be sending out emails with the relevant details in the upcoming days. A note about the chat and Q&A. The chat is open for conversation among audience members, but only questions shared via the Q&A function will be addressed. We won't be scanning the chat for your questions. Now let me introduce our panel in brief. Dr. Ilai Saltzman is an associate research professor of Israel Studies and the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at the University of Maryland in College Park. His scholarship and teaching focus on international security, Israeli foreign and security policy, U.S. foreign policy, and political psychology. Dr. Saltzman is the author of Securitizing Balance of Power Theory and Polymorphic Reconceptualization. He is also the author of numerous scholarly articles and book chapters and the commentaries in Foreign Affairs, the Los Angeles Times, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, and other prominent outlets. Dr. Saltzman earned his PhD in International Relations in 2010 from the University of Haifa and was a postdoctoral research fellow at the International Security Program, Balfour Center for Science and International Affairs, John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. On board, our board member, Avraham Spraragen, is the Policy and Research Coordinator of the J Street Policy Center and the 2026 Sustained Impact Human Rights Fellow at the Squire Patton Boggs Foundation. He is currently pursuing a JD degree at Georgetown University Law Center with a concentration in human rights and refugee law. Avraham received an MA in Arab Studies from Georgetown Schools of Foreign Service in 2025 and a BA in Government from Cornell University in 2021. He also holds certificates in Israel and Middle East Studies from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and in Middle East and Conflict Studies from Tel Aviv University. Avraham is a lifelong Hebrew speaker and has studied Arabic in Amman, Jordan, and Rabat, Morocco. He previously served as a research and writing assistant at the Alliance for Middle East Peace and is a board member of Partners for Progressive Israel. Now let me hand things over to Avraham, and I'll be at the end up to wrap things up. Avraham, take it away.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, partners. Ilai, thank you for being here. Welcome. My first question to you pertains to election scheduling. So we know that legislative elections are scheduled to be held by October 27th to elect the 120 members of the 26th Knesset. Can you give us a sense of how that date was set, whether that is enshrined under Israeli law?
Thank you so much, Avraham, for having me, Karen, and all the others at Partnership for Progressive Israel. Thank you so much for having me. The date is legally binding. It is defined by Israeli law as a result of the fact that Israeli Knessets or Israeli parliament serve for 4 years. And this is the end of the term of this current Knesset, the 22nd, that started in November 2022. My apologies. But still, the actual date of the elections is pending. It is still out there. It is not clear. There was a preliminary call or a preliminary vote to call for earlier elections. So it will be prior to or before October 27th, which is the legally binding date, but it is unclear. Next Monday, there will be another debate in the Israeli parliament, the first reading. And it seems that the date will move one way or another based on the political schedule of the prominent coalition partners. It seems like Benjamin Netanyahu is eager to do it as early as possible. Some reports suggested September 1st, in fact, which is paradoxically perhaps the first day of the school year, the K through 12 school year in Israel. So I think it's not viable because most of the voting takes place in schools, as it is the case here in the United States and elsewhere. Other partners, such as Aryeh Deri, the chairman of the Shas party, ultra-Orthodox Sephardi party, want somewhere in the mid-September, because this is a period where most of the religious members of the community are free and they can come to Israel and vote from abroad. So it's still up for grabs, bottom line.
And so to clarify, the latest, it has to be held by October 27th.
Correct.
The earliest we could see this happen is September 1st, in your estimation?
Yeah, normally elections are kind of scheduled, if it's before the due date or the deadline, about 3 months in advance. So we're kind of end of May, which brings us to September or so. But again, all things can happen. For example, an emergency situation. For example, if Israel is at war during the scheduled date, things can happen. Things can be a bit more fluid. But it is, at the end of the day, it's a political decision of the political actors.
Speaking of politics and political actors, one of the complicating factors here on scheduling this election is the role of the ultra-Orthodox parties represented by United Torah Judaism and Shas, as you mentioned, the Ashkenazi and Sephardi parties, respectively. The Degel HaTorah faction of UTJ, which are key partners in Netanyahu's coalition, they recently announced that they would push to dissolve the Knesset, potentially triggering early elections. They specifically cited the coalition's failure to pass a draft exemption law for yeshiva students. I wonder if you could take us into what exactly that draft exemption law consists of and why is it being held up?
Well, very briefly, we'll talk about the historical development or the evolution of this
Please.
norm, if you like, or the law as such. Ultra-Orthodox were exempt from serving in the military in the early years of the State of Israel upon its creation. It was a way to maintain kind of the soul of the Jewish people, or the ability to perpetuate the survival of the Jewish community after the Holocaust in Europe. So at the beginning, it was a few hundreds of aspiring prodigal, if you'd like, students, Haredi students in the yeshivas, but then it kind of escalated as time went by, especially in the late 1970s when Menachem Begin takes office and kind of opens up, or kind of breaches, if you'd like, the entirety of this arrangement and exempts the totality of Haredi Jews who are students in yeshivas. So that was kind of a loophole. As long as you're a Haredi yeshiva student, you're exempt. As a result of both politics, but mostly of judicial adjudication, the Israeli Supreme Court says this is not viable. They tried multiple times to find a solution over the years. The Tal Committee, for example, tried to finesse some kind of a political solution or a technical solution to this problem. At the end of the day, the Israeli Supreme Court says this is not feasible. It violates the principle of equality. How can you have an 18-year-old secular Jew serving in the military? How can you have somebody at the same time studying in a yeshiva and benefiting from all kinds of social benefits and perks? David Landau, who is the rabbi of Degel Torah, one of those senior rabbis or senior spiritual leaders, says a couple of weeks ago, this is the end. We can't deal with it. It seems very unfeasible that the Netanyahu government will move forward with something that we, the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi group, feel comfortable with. So let's call it off. Let's call for elections and let's deal with it at one point in time. On the one hand, this was a way to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu into restarting his effort to try to placate, to try to alleviate their concerns. But at the same time, it seems like the gap or the gulf is too wide, too massive to overcome. And indeed, people are not talking about whether they can deal with it or resolve it, but rather whether the elections will take place, as we said, in September or October or some other date between now and October 27th.
Right, and I suppose in recognition of that gap, Ophir Katz, after the UTJ announcement, who, for folks in the audience, is chairman of the Israeli government coalition and a lawmaker from Netanyahu's Likud party, he submitted a bill ostensibly based on that UTJ announcement to dissolve the Knesset, together with the heads, crucially, of all the coalition factions. Last week, Israeli lawmakers voted 110-0 in favor of a preliminary reading of this government-backed bill. Does this tell you that early elections are inevitable?
Yes and no. Yes, because there's a momentum, and that matters. When there's movement, when there's inertia, then that oftentimes kind of has its own life or its own dynamics. On the other hand, the fact that Ophir Katz initiated the political process, the political legislative process, means that this is now in the hands of the Israeli government, in Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And he can play around with how do you move between the preliminary reading, the first reading, the second reading, and the third and final one. In other words, next week, when they convene again to do what is known as the first reading, they will start talking about a date. But they can play for time, as in a baseball game, not in a baseball, but a basketball game. They can just play for time and play defense, because the chairperson of whatever committee that will be entrusted with legislating this piece of law will have the capacity with the support of the coalition to determine the date, or how soon will they go to the second and third and final reading.
Okay, thank you for all that. That's super helpful. Also, by way of setting the stage for us before we get into the nitty-gritty of this upcoming election, you mentioned one of the reasons, perhaps, you touched on why Netanyahu might want elections to be held earlier. My understanding, too, is that the politics surrounding the anniversary of October 7th, 2023 has something to do with this. Can you give us a sense of Bibi's thinking on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's from his perspective, certainly there's something optically speaking, something very, very ominous about holding elections during October, on the lead up to October 7th or immediately thereafter. Certainly his opposition, certainly in the Israeli public, but also on the political circles, would want to attach October 7th to him as an albatross, something that will, from their perspective, certainly eventually will bring down his premiership. So he has an interest of decoupling, if you'd like, the date of the elections and the memory or the trauma of October 7th. At the same time, as I said, he's also playing the political game vis-a-vis his coalition partners because he needs to take care of all kinds of other business within the coalition or within his group. For example, we'll talk about that perhaps later, he has a couple of parties that seem to be unable to cross the threshold. And so he will probably try or may want to try to create kind of a political or a new movement or a political party or force some unification. And he wants to be ready with that as well. So that's another consideration. But in Israel, everything is political. The date is political.
Sure.
Who is running is political, obviously. And the messaging is political as well.
Absolutely. Another consideration, perhaps, let me know what you think, is his own corruption scandal, right? And Netanyahu's legal troubles. To what extent do you think that's a factor on scheduling?
As I said, everything is political. Even the case, the court case is political. If you're a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, then this was all tailored. This was all the deep state colluding together to topple his premiership, topple him from his position. If you're in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, then you say that he's trying to stay away from jail, trying to get away from jail, and try to extend the hearings as much as possible. This case as much as possible, and you can find all kinds of indications for one way or another. So, for example, he failed to appear in court in the last couple of meetings that were scheduled due to national security considerations. He needed to have all kinds of cabinet meetings as well as conversations over the phone with Trump and other world leaders, and so that allows his lawyer to ask for a delay or to prevent him from even attending the hearings or something to that effect. But yes, absolutely. From Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective, I believe, postponing the possibility of losing in the elections, whatever the mechanism is, delaying or going for an earlier date is his only way, from his perspective, to stay out of jail. So as long as the case is being heard in the courts, he's fine. I think he's very concerned about the final verdict, so to speak, or a conviction before an election.
Now, I wonder too, there's not much to say about it. Well, we don't know, and we don't have access to his medical records or to what his doctors have to say, but there is some rumor of a deteriorating health situation. Do you think that at all factors into this?
Again, it's political. So if you're a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, you don't care about that. It's completely, it's unnoticed. If you're in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu, then everything matters. So, for example, a couple of years ago, he was on a trip, supposedly dehydrated, and then evacuated to a hospital. He appeared he had some heart issues that he failed to disclose, and then it was reported just earlier today or yesterday was it that he visited Hadassah and Karim Hospital for some dental issues. Went to the dentist at the hospital, and so people started, thinking, why do you go to a hospital to take care of your teeth? Is it something else? He had some urological issues, prostate cancer supposedly, or that was removed. So is that connected to these two elements? There are claims that some of these doctors kind of finagled, if you like, or fudged some of the records to make him appear less or more healthy, if you'd like. So there's a lot of rumors swirling around. Definitely.
Sure. And I can't help but make the comparison to our president here in the United States, who uses this as a political weapon and tends to cover up some of his health concerns. But if all that isn't complicated enough, you also have the uniqueness of Israel's election system. So I'd like for you to help us elucidate that some. Explain to us, give us an overview of how Israel's proportional representation system works.
Yeah, so I teach a class on Israeli politics and society every fall, and I take a lot of time to go into the weeds with this. We don't have the time for that, so I'm going to give kind of a big, broad strokes of the general setting here. The main thing that people need to understand, certainly if you talk about it from an American perspective, that this is a whole different political system. It's a parliamentary system. Um, and so the separation of power or powers, plural, is much less distinct, much less recognizable as such as in the United States, for example. But it's not the parliamentary system you see in the UK either. The Israeli system, the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament is a unicameral. There's just one single parliament setting. There's no House of Commons and House of Lords as in the United Kingdom or in the United States where you have Senate and you have the House of Representatives. So it's just one setting. It's a parliamentary system that is based on a single cameral system. The entirety of the state of Israel is one constituency. There's no regional elections. There's no federal system, local system, state system. It's one group. It's one roster of voters, so to speak. You have 120 seats in the Israeli parliament. The threshold is 3.25% of the kosher vote or the legitimate votes. In other words, they tally those kosher or legitimate votes and they calculate what is 3.25, and then you determine which parties were able to cross or which one fell short and was left behind. Now, even that is complicated, but you can create all kinds of pre-election arrangements and agreements with other parties to try and take care of leftovers. So, for example, if you won, let's say, 5.3 seats, then you can finagle that and allocate the 0.3 to another party, and then they can cross the threshold. So even if it's mathematically simple, there's a political way to circumvent that and make it more difficult, if you like. The other main difference for those here in the United States, but possibly others in other countries around the world, there are lots of parties in Israel. Each one has a party. Each person almost has a party. There were a veteran party, an elderly or retired people party. There was a party advocating for yoga, peace through yoga at one point in time. So each and every election cycle has its plethora, if you'd like, or a number of parties that are kind of weird. They're not conventional in a sense. They kind of emerged as a result of very kind of tactical or very immediate concerns as such. So we have a very complicated system on the one hand. You have multiple parties, which makes the whole process extremely, extremely messy.
So you have this multi-party system reflecting the diversity of the state of Israel and society, the ethnic diversity, the religious diversity, et cetera, and so on. My understanding too is that Israelis at the polls don't vote for candidates; they vote for the parties. They do have access to the list of candidates ahead of each one of these elections. Explain to us how those lists come together.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So this is not an individual kind of voting, as is the case in the United States, for example. You will vote for a particular candidate for Senate or House of Representative or a president. We're talking about party lists. And this also changes from one party to the other. For example, the Likud party, the predominant, the biggest party in the Knesset today, certainly the Prime Minister's party, has primaries, which means that people vote within the party and they form the list itself, which opens a whole case of difficulties or challenges. People also organize into blocks. So you have deals being made. If you vote for me, I'll give you my voters. If you vote for them, they will give you their votes, and so on and so forth. Other parties are less democratic, for example. Israel Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman's party, is determined by the chairperson, in this case, Avigdor Lieberman, who sits and says, well, you're going to be first, I'm going to be second, you're going to be third, and so on and so forth.
And Lieberman, excuse me to interject here, just Lieberman for the audience, he represents a Russian Jewish population in Israel, generally speaking.
Right-wing, normally right-wing, yeah, absolutely. Who was also a very close confidant and ally of Benjamin Netanyahu in the 1990s. He was his director general when he was first elected prime minister. So you have different parties and different system.
Right.
The Democrats, for example, will run a primary, so you'll have multiple people competing for the kind of what is the realistic spot or the ranking within the list. But again, ultra-Orthodox parties, for example, Sephardi or Mizrahi, are determined by the rabbis. They have a council, and they determine the ranking or the order. Very rigid. It is very centralized. There's no primary. There's no negotiation as such, although there's a lot of politics behind the scene, obviously.
And the Democrats are the sort of center-left, the latest iteration of the Labor Party, led by Yair Golan. We'll get into him and the specifics there a little later. So just to cap us off on the election system itself, we know that a coalition, in order to be formed, has to secure a 61-seat majority in the 120-member Knesset. Explain to us how that very messy, at least from an outsider's perspective, coalition building process works.
So again, very messy. Even from we talked about the lead up to the elections, even the elections, once you have the actual results, the final results, the Israeli president, who's a very ceremonial, very symbolic figure for the most part, is entrusted with entrusting the first right or the first ability to form a coalition government that needs to acquire the 61 seats to have a majority. However, the president is holding consultations with the various members of the parties who were able to get into, they crossed the threshold, they were able to get into the Knesset. And the law is not very clear. The argument is that he's entrusting the member of the parliament that was elected, the Israeli member of Knesset, who has the most chances of securing a robust and stable coalition. But it's not very clear whether that is the biggest party or whether that is a function of political mechanisms of sorts. And for example, in 2021, my apologies, Naftali Bennett, who was the smallest, who headed one of the smallest parties in the Israeli parliament, was able to form a coalition, and not only that, but to become prime minister. Right. So the president entrusts or gives the authority of one member of the Knesset to form a coalition. They have 28 days. They can ask for an extension of 14 more days. And so at the end of this period, they can come and say, we have formed a coalition, and they go to the Knesset. Everybody convenes, and then they need to vote. And you're absolutely right, Avraham. They need 61 as a vote of confidence to form the coalition and go into play. Once they're in, there are some ways to bring down a government. One is a vote of non-confidence, which is a regular vote. It can pass 50 to 25, for example. It doesn't need a special majority as such. But there's a way to bypass this as well. For example, one of the things that was considered in the last couple of days, especially from Degel Torah, this United Torah Judaism, my apologies, was not to dissolve the Knesset, but rather to vote on a vote of non-confidence against Benjamin Netanyahu, but at the same time create what is known as a constructive vote of non-confidence, come up with an alternative prime minister. So everything stays but the prime minister. It seems that this was a way for them to apply more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to try to force him into capitulating on the issue of conscription that we discussed a few minutes ago.
Well, that's very helpful. I'd like to remind folks at this stage, as we approach the top of the hour, that we'd like to hear from you in the form of questions to our expert here today. So please include your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to it after I ask another few questions. So Ilai, we've done election scheduling, we've done election system, and I think before we turn to all the latest electoral developments, it's important to understand briefly the makeup of the current Israeli government, coalition, and the opposition in the Knesset. So just give us a sense, when was this government formed? What kind of mandate did they get from the electorate? How many seats do they have in the coalition? And then if you could, a breakdown of beyond Netanyahu's Likud party in the coalition, what are the major parties in the coalition, as well as the major parties in the opposition?
I got you. Well, a lot to unpack there. Certainly, I hear you. I'll do my best.
Best of luck.
But certainly the last elections took place in November 2022. Benjamin Netanyahu was able to form a government that came into office in early 2023, and rather immediately thereafter, the judicial reform or judicial overhaul was announced. This is a process by which the Israeli Minister of Justice tried to challenge perhaps the role or the power from his perspective, certainly the excessive power that the judicial had, certainly the Supreme Court in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has been running, quote unquote, with his what he calls his natural partners. And they include with the classical right wing, the Likud party. They include parties such as Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir's Jewish Might or Jewish Power, Otzma Yehudit, if you wish, Shas party that we discussed, ultra-Orthodox Sephardi party, Yadut Torah, United Torah Judaism, and Hatzionut Datit, Bezalel Smotrich, my apologies, religious Zionists. So these are kind of the natural, and they initially formed 64 seats. They had 64 seats in the parliament as a result of kind of movements back and forth during the post-October 7th period. For example, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, who were in blue and white, joined the coalition to support Benjamin Netanyahu's fight against the Palestinians in the war against the Palestinians, but eventually they withdrew or kind of resigned as a result of kind of intra-coalition friction. Kind of shortly thereafter, Gidon Saar, who was a member of Blue and White at one point in time, joined the coalition. And so now from 64, they have 68 votes or 68 seats. It's a pretty comfortable majority in that sense. But again, given the friction over the question of conscription, which kind of led to and certainly expedited or enhanced this call for elections, for sooner elections. There are some parties that were unable to cross the threshold at the time, for example. Balad was out, which is a nationalistic or nationalist Palestinian Israeli party at the time, headed by Azmi Bashara, who fled to Qatar at the time. He was alleged cooperating with Hezbollah during the war in 2006, and he kind of fled. They are trying to reinvent themselves or reimagine themselves. We might talk about that in a few minutes. But certainly the threshold is a major consideration. It's 3.25, as I said, and again, Benjamin Netanyahu is very receptive to that because some polls show that the Bezalel Smotrich's party, religious Zionism, is not entering the Israeli Knesset, is not going beyond the 3.25.
Okay, so that brings us to the latest polling in the upcoming election. According to the latest polling, I'm sure you've been following closely. Which party gets the most seats? Is it Netanyahu's Likud? Tell us too, does the pro-Netanyahu bloc have enough to win a 61-seat majority? Or does it look like we're headed for an anti-Netanyahu bloc majority?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to preface and say that there's a possibility that if a coalition does not emerge, the prime minister remains as an interim prime minister, which happened quite frequently between 2019 and 2022, where Israel went to the polls 5 times in general. So this is something that Benjamin Netanyahu is, that's a minimum aspiration, if you like, or a minimum hope for him, of course, other than forming the next government. I was looking at the polls. The most there are 2 that came out. The previous one, Israeli polling takes place on a Friday, or they're released on Fridays. So May 21st was one. The biggest party, according to that one, this is the Ma'ariv poll, B'Yachad, which is a combination of a new party formed by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid's party as well. So this B'Yachad means together, and so this is together, literally. And they have
Excuse me. So Naftali Bennett being a former prime minister and Yair Lapid being a former prime minister, they served together. They were political partners. One served as prime minister while the other served as alternate prime minister, and they sort of had something of a rotation agreement. And that was in that so-called government of change or unity government. So they've come back together, and it looks like they're doing fairly well in the polls, is what you're saying.
Yes. In a way, they do. The expectation was that they can kind of bring more votes, but they seem to be settled in on 24, 25 seats, for both parties. Likud party in the Friday poll has 24 seats. Eisenkot, we mentioned he's a former chief of staff. He was
Mhm.
a parliamentarian with Benny Gantz in blue and white, has 15 seats. The Democrats, which is Yair Golan's party, as you rightfully mentioned, is a integration of Meretz, kind of more left wing, and
Mhm.
Labor Party
Mhm.
has 10. Jewish Might or Jewish Power. This is Betzalel. Sorry, my apologies. Itamar Ben-Gvir 8 seats. Israel Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman's 9 seats.
Mhm.
Shas 8
Mhm.
seats. United Jewish Torah 7 seats. Hadash-Tal, which is a combination of 2 Arab or Palestinian parties, 5 seats for the both of them. Ram, which is the Mansour Abbas's, who's a kind of a Palestinian or an Israeli Arab leader, mostly from the Muslim part, the southern Muslim flank, if you'd like. Religious Zionism crosses the thresholds and wins 4 seats. My apologies.
Mhm.
And there are
Mhm.
3 parties that are left out. One is blue
Mhm.
and white, Benny Gantz. The second one
Mhm.
is Balad, the nationalistic Palestinian
Mhm.
Israeli party, and the reservists or the Miluimnikim, which is, again, as I said, this is kind of the new party of the age. These are reservists headed by Yoaz Handel, who was a member of the government back during 21-22, the
Mhm.
change government that you see.
Mhm.
On other polls, one that came out recently, just on Monday, show kind of a similar number. So it's up 1, down 1
Right,
or
right,
so.
right.
But the bottom line is as follows,
Yeah,
Avram, and this is kind of the main takeaway from these polls is as follows.
sure.
Benjamin Netanyahu does not have a coalition,
Mm.
but the opposition is unable to form a coalition without
Mhm.
the Arab parties.
Mhm. Mhm.
So this is
Mhm.
the bottom line, and it's pretty consistent. Whether you look at the polling from last Friday or the most recent one from this Monday, it is very clear that the Netanyahu bloc, the current coalition, is
Mhm.
about 54, 55 or so, and the opposition is 55, 56 or so, plus Arab parties, which will allow them to have a majority. Again, there's changes within the coalition or within the
Mhm.
opposition, but for the most part, the game of coalitions is a game of blocks, opposition and coalition, pro Netanyahu, if you wish, or anti Netanyahu, to put it in
Mhm.
personal terms. And it seems like Benjamin Netanyahu does not have the seats to form a coalition as it is now the case.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
opposition does not have a coalition unless it is joined by the Arab parties or the Palestinian parties.
And so you're saying that Netanyahu, in the way that last time he was able to rely on the far right and religious Zionists and the Haredim, that's not going to suffice this time around.
Seems it's not enough.
So who would he have to try to, who can he possibly, and in your estimation, perhaps, who might he try to convince?
Well, he has very limited options as we speak now because he's kind of boycotted by the other members of the opposition. Naftali Bennett said he's not going to sit with him. Eisenkot would
Sure.
not sit with him. Certainly Yair Golan from the Democrats and so on and so forth. This is why he's trying to work his way within the coalition or within the broader base. One of the main concerns that Benjamin Netanyahu has is uh, uh, whether people will show up on election day or not and vote for him. So one way, as I said I kind of hinted to in the beginning, is to try to create all kinds of unifications. Whether he can bring Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir once again to join forces, or to create some kind of to elevate another right-wing party. Ofer Winter is another kind of prominent ex-Israeli general who's very vocal about the war in Gaza, about the war in Lebanon and elsewhere. And he seems to be kind of very perhaps a promising prospect for somebody who can
Mhm.
form a coalition or another party that will support the current coalition or at least kind of change the composition or the numbering in that sense.
Mhm. And then just to emphasize, the opposition does not have a coalition, a 61-seat majority without the Arab parties.
Correct.
The Haredim and the far right certainly, and the current iteration of Likud. So unless we see eventually a post-Netanyahu Likud, these are non-starters in terms of coming together with a Naftali Bennett and an opposition, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah, you're
really,
absolutely
we're
right.
just left with the Arab parties.
Correct. These certainly Mansour Abbas and his colleagues who are also contemplating how to run. They may run as a single block, as a technical block, as it's called in Israel. And in that case, if they elevate the number of votes or the number of seats that they receive, they may be even bigger kingmakers in the next elections. With regards to the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox parties, there was a report yesterday that was denied by Yair Golan, who supposedly him and Gadi Eisenkot said that they are flirting with the idea of joining forces with the Haredi parties. Yair Golan denied that and said this is not on the table given the state of the conscription law, all kinds of financial and benefit issues that are related to that. And so it's a non-starter for them as well. But again, politics makes strange bedfellows. Naftali Bennett during the 21-22 election cycle came out and signed a document on the record in television live where he said, I'm not going to join forces with the Arab parties. And look and behold, elections come, and then he signed the coalition agreement with Mansour Abbas.
Right. Okay, Ilai, I'm going to pose one more question, I think, to you before we transition to Q&A. There are already a handful of excellent questions in the chat, so I'm looking forward to hearing your answers to those, Ilai. In the meantime, as I ask this question and Ilai answers, please, if you still have a question, include it down below. We should have time to get to all of them. Ilai, this is a bigger picture question, more existential perhaps, for the future of the state of Israel. What does this election mean for Israeli democracy, Israel's democratic institutions, and then maybe touch on specifically Israeli policy on the Palestinian issue, and then the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship. So a lot of these issues are at stake here and certainly pressing. And the outcome of this election is going to be highly determinative.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Avraham. I think it's a good question. I would say the following. It's almost a cliche to say that this is a consequential election, but I really, really believe that this is the most consequential ever in Israeli history because I strongly believe, think and believe that this will determine the face of Israel moving forward for a considerable time. This is not to say that there are no other undercurrent, broader, deeper trends in Israeli demographics, social beliefs, and so on and so forth, but it is very consequential regardless. And yes, you're absolutely right. It will determine whether this judicial reform that was launched in January 2023 will continue. It is still continuing as we speak. The Israeli Minister of Justice, as well as the chairperson of the Judicial Committee of the Knesset, are working very hard to promote these reforms that are designed to, in my view at least, to weaken the oversight of the Supreme Court, try to mitigate the role or the impact of free media in Israel. They're trying to curb the Israeli state, what was known at the time state-controlled television. They're trying to curb some of the regulator bodies in Israeli media. And so there's a combination there. They're trying to dismantle the Attorney General's position. There was a legislation that was passed earlier today, kind of preliminary. I think it was preliminary, if not the first call or the first reading, to try to separate the AG's role as a kind of somebody, kind of a more closer to the American model, if you wish, but without the checks and balances or the separation of power that exists here. So this is extremely consequential. It has significant impact on the way that the conscription law will be promoted in the next Knesset, the budget, and every other thing. Certainly the connection that you mentioned, both in terms of the domestic politics and Israeli external affairs. And again, I want to quote Henry Kissinger, one of my favorite quotes of all time: Israel doesn't have foreign policy, only domestic politics. And this will determine the composition of the next government or the coalition, will determine Israeli foreign policy when it comes to the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, certainly with regards to Lebanon and the war in Lebanon, as well as the Iranian war that is taking place now, or what seems to be kind of a waning down of the conflict, possibly, hopefully, towards some kind of a resolution. It will also, as you mentioned, will have an impact on U.S.-Israel relations. And I think one of the main casualties of the Benjamin Netanyahu years is the loss of bipartisanship when it comes to Israel. Certainly, we can talk about the changes in Israeli in U.S. demographics, the 18 to 34, 35, the opposition to Israel within the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican Party or some of the MAGA base. But this election will have a consequential impact on all these issues, both inside and outside Israel, no doubt.
So I think that's a good place to end for my questioning. Ilai, I could continue to pick your brain for hours if it were up to me, but unfortunately, we don't have that time. So I'll instead move to the chat and ask you an initial question here from Robert, who wants you to explain what you meant earlier on in the discussion by kosher votes.
In Israel, when we say kosher votes, we mean those that were not disqualified as a result of all kinds of irregularities. So, for example, those who were able to vote, we're not talking, in the United States, we talk about voting patterns or, immigrants who vote or dead people who vote. It's pretty much the same thing. The kosher votes or the legitimate votes are those who are legally able and authorized to vote. And so they tally all of these and then they mark the 3.25%, which means this is the bar that you need to cross in order to enter the Israeli parliament, the threshold.
Okay. There are at least a couple of questions about the role of the Arab parties. I know we touched on it, but Jesse is questioning whether Netanyahu's attempt to ban the Arab parties, more specifically perhaps prohibit Ram of Mansour Abbas, sort of the Islamist party, from running in the next election. How concerned should we be about something like that? And then there's a question about will an Arab party ultimately be included in the new government?
So I'll start with the second one. In a way, it's not clear how they will run, whether they will run separately. There was a joint list a couple of cycles ago, but it kind of disintegrated certainly after Balad didn't cross the threshold, so that was not possible. But they may run as a technical block, as I said, and some of the polling shows that they will, if they run together, may receive anywhere between 15 and 17 seats, which is very sizable, very significant. So that will be a force multiplier. I will also mention that Mansour Abbas, who was the head of Ram party, was courted by Benjamin Netanyahu during the lead up to the inauguration of this current government, and he was tempted by Benjamin Netanyahu to join the coalition himself. Not only that, he hosted him in his official residence in Jerusalem a few times. He applied a lot of pressure by his allies to try and force Mansour Abbas to join the coalition government. Mansour Abbas refused, and at the end of the day, joined Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid in forming the coalition at the time. Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party are trying all kinds of things to try to limit the ability of the Arab parties to vote, to be voted, and some of the voters, the Arab voters as well. They're trying to tackle that through the General Voting Commission, for example. They're challenging some of the appointments that were made recently, for example, as well as the departure of their director general. So there's a lot of means, but I want to make sure that people understand that while Israel suffers from a kind of a very porous political system in terms of there's no separation as such between the legislature and the executive. The prime minister is also a member of the Knesset. So in American terms, Trump is also the Speaker of the House or Speaker of the Senate or something to that extent. Nevertheless, the Israeli Supreme Court that is being attacked or has been under attack since January 2023 is trying to the best of its ability to try to block all these initiatives. So even if something passes preliminarily or is a decree by the prime minister or the coalition, it may be struck down by the Supreme Court at the end of the day. So we should be very vigilant, but you shouldn't lose hope.
You mentioned the Arab parties, the four major ones running as part of a joint electoral slate. They call it the Arab Joint List. Just this week, Hadash, Ta'al, and Balad, without Ram notably, announced the revival of the joint list. They ran together in 2015 and 2020. Why is Ram holding out? They called on Ram to join, and Mansour Abbas indicated a general willingness, but there seems to be ideological differences, perhaps, that are keeping them apart. Could you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. Israeli politics goes all across the board, both for Jews and Arabs, and in that sense, or non-Jews, non-Arabs, Christians and Muslims. My apologies. And in that respect, Mansour Abbas, who was part of the coalition, is much more vocal about his willingness or inclination to join the opposition if and when they get elected into office and join the coalition and serve as a member of the coalition, as it did between 2021 and 2022. I think that the other parties are still trying to find the right language or the right terms for them to agree, kind of carte blanche, and say, under all conditions rather than under certain conditions, we will join the opposition. And they're still trying to finesse what their ideological kind of red lines are. On the other hand, I think it's, everything in politics is personal, even in a parliamentary system like Israel. And I think that Mansour Abbas sees himself as the leader of the next generation of Palestinian citizens of Israel or Israeli Arabs. And I think he feels that people such as Ahmad Tibi and others are kind of a handicap of sorts. They're kind of preventing him from actually capturing this moment and rising to the occasion and becoming once again the playmaker or the kingmaker of Israeli politics.
Staying on the issue of the Arab vote, Marcia wants to know about the disenfranchisement of Palestinian citizens of Israel. There's talk of, and there's perhaps been evidence of, voter suppression and violent intimidation, and regrettably, on the part of Netanyahu, the Likud party, and certainly the far right and other elements. And even more tragically, perhaps in the opposition as well, some campaigning on a certain amount of anti-Arab bigotry and discrimination. How concerned should we be about all that? And perhaps you can speak to what it means for, well, the outcome and Israel as a democracy with equal rights for all who live within Israel proper.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. These are major concerns. They are legitimate concerns. Some of these measures were applied at a time. Certainly the idea of trying to scapegoat the Arab voters or the Palestinian voters in that sense, coming in droves to the polling stations was one allegation at a time, trying to raise or motivate Likud party or the Likud-based party voters to try to come in greater numbers. Absolutely. As I said, there's a public sphere and there's a kind of more legalistic sphere. I can certainly see a prospect or a scenario where Benjamin Netanyahu's party is trying to quash or to disqualify some Arab parties on the account of not supporting the state of Israel as being a Jewish and democratic state, for example. You have Arab parties such as Balad, that are calling to create a single state or a one-state solution, so to speak, kind of separating state and synagogue as it is the case now. Certainly, in the aftermath of the nationality law, Chok HaLeom in Hebrew, where the status of Israel as the state of the Jewish people was enshrined in a basic law, this has some merit. And certainly, some of the members of these parties or these political movements were very, very critical of Israeli actions in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran. And so right-wing parties, certainly the Likud party, may take advantage of that. As I said, at the same time, we got to be very confident or hopeful, if you wish, that the Israeli Supreme Court and the Central Elections Committee, chaired by the Deputy Chief Justice Noam Solberg, will be vigilant and stand their ground and allow for free elections. I think that the other caveat is that the Israeli minister, what was known as the Minister of Police, now Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has a vested interest in trying to curtail Arab votes or Palestinian votes in Israel, and he has the means now. The Israeli police has become, in effect, his own personal long arm for whatever assignments, whether to quash protests in the street or perhaps cracking down or pestering, if you like, Bedouin communities in the south as well.
We got another technical question, quick. There are a couple of them having to do with the question of whether or not Israel has absentee balloting, absentee voting. Does that exist? And if you're an Israeli citizen anywhere in the world, surely you can return to Israel and cast your vote. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's no absentee voting. You can't vote while you're abroad unless you're on official capacity. So if you work for the Israeli embassy or for the Jewish agency in an official capacity, then you can vote here in the United States or elsewhere around the world. Otherwise, you'll have to physically travel to Israel and vote during elections day. I can tell you that there's a number of initiatives that are trying to energize Israeli communities abroad and try to encourage them to come to Israel and vote, given the fact that it is defined by many as the most consequential elections in Israeli history, certainly in the near past. And so they are trying to galvanize this. They're trying to pull people together to get better bargains when it comes to plane tickets. And there's a designated website where you can log in and see if your Israeli ID number shows you where you need to vote, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of activity surrounding that. But no, you can't vote in the United States unless you're in official capacity, for example.
Ellen asks a really good question. Broadly, we referred a lot to right and left. It's not necessarily as clear as that, right? And it doesn't necessarily mirror the right and left in this country, in the United States. Explain what right and left means in Israeli politics, perhaps what you mean by it. And then maybe if I could tack on here a more specific question as it relates to, because we said we'd circle back to Democratim and the Yair Golan phenomenon.
Yeah.
He's a deputy chief of staff of the IDF, who's taken the helm of this center-left party that you mentioned is a kind of merger between the Labor Party, which is essentially the founding party of the State of Israel, and Meretz, which is your furthest left-wing Zionist party that's essentially defunct at this point. What does that coming together between those two elements mean? And what does Yair Golan's leadership of the center-left mean for that distinction between right and left in Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. It's spot on. This is a wonderful question. And again, we can talk about that for, this is a whole conversation we can have in and of itself, but certainly.
Definitely.
Yeah, the classical right and left questions in Israel were mostly economic as well as political with regards to the Palestinians or Arabs by and large. This is no longer the case as such. It is not clear cut. I think that certainly given the animosity towards Benjamin Netanyahu, right and left kind of lost its classical meaning. Certainly, Yair Lapid is in favor of a free market. Just as the Likud party, it's all about who's running the show, so to speak. And this is why people in Israel are kind of divided into two groups, whether you're pro-Bibi or against Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu's nickname, obviously. So it's not a question of right and left in the political sense. I'll give you another example of what I mean by that. I truly believe that if Benjamin Netanyahu were not the prime minister at the moment, were not the leader of Likud, the right wing, the classical right wing in Israel, and by classical I mean kind of hardcore when it comes to politics, free markets, and so on and so forth, would be able to form a coalition government in a couple of minutes. It is very personal it is very personal, to not be able to form this coalition government. And I think that Avigdor Lieberman, is a wonderful case study in this case. He is right-wing. He's a settler, very hardline when it comes to politics, the relationship or the negotiations with the Palestinians, the relationship with Lebanon, certainly the Iranian nuclear program, and so on and so forth. But he hates Benjamin Netanyahu so much to the extent that he objected to joining the coalition at the time. So if you just move Benjamin Netanyahu, that will open a space for kind of perhaps a return to the more classical right-wing, left-wing conversation that Israel had a couple of decades ago. It is not still the case, or not necessarily the case, but we'll see. The Democrats is a very interesting case, and Yair Golan is a very interesting particular case as an individual because he encapsulates a lot of left-wing, classical left-wing ideologies, but at the same time very hawkish when it comes to security affairs or international affairs. Right? He was very much in favor of Israel's attack, not very much, but certainly in favor of Israel's attack against Iran back in late February 2026. But he was criticizing Israel for or the United States as well, for lacking a strategy, kind of a more cohesive, comprehensive approach. And to some extent, he's kind of trying to reclaim perhaps kind of a Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's prime minister in the late 70s and the early 1990s, approach of being both leftish when it comes to the relationship with the Arab world and the Palestinians specifically, trying to engage, trying to strike a bargain, sign peace agreements, but at the same time remaining very vigilant when it comes to international affairs, security affairs, and so on and so forth. So again, I think that one of the pathologies, if you wish, of Benjamin Netanyahu's almost 20 years in office is the fact that it kind of sucked out the air out of this ideological conversation, political conversation over values and principles and objectives and so on and so forth, and became too much personal.
We have a few unanswered questions still. Ilai, if you have another 5 minutes to spare,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here
is
for
that all
you.
right? Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's try to get these in the last 5 minutes here. I'll pose the first one to you briefly. A questioner asks about the role of the impartial National Commission of Inquiry surrounding October 7th. How do the politics of that and the question of whether or not it can truly be and it will be impartial, how does that all factor into the upcoming election?
As far as Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, there will never be a national commission of inquiry
Mm,
as long as he's in office.
mm,
I'll give you a case in point that was actually kind of put in practice today. A Haredi party said, if you don't support all kinds of social benefits that we were entitled in the past and were removed or revoked by the Israeli Supreme Court as part of the conscription issue, we will vote in favor of a national commission of inquiry. And Benjamin Netanyahu immediately reinstated these perks or these social benefits to avoid even the appearance of a prospect or a chance of this commission to be formed. So this is consequential elections, absolutely, as I said, both in domestic and external politics, also with regards to this inquiry commission, absolutely.
mm. We have a question from our president, Paul Sham,
Ah,
about the failure of Avraham Borg and others to establish, Avraham Borg being a former
member of labor, he was
labor
Speaker of the House. Yeah,
turned Meretz. My understanding is that he's now a Hadash member,
yeah,
former also Speaker of the Knesset.
yeah.
His failure and others to establish an Arab-Jewish party. So you perhaps speak to the role of Arab-Jewish political partnership in the lead up to the election.
Well, one must say that there are non-Jews in kind of typical or classical traditional Jewish parties and vice versa to some extent. Hadash is kind of a joint. You have Ofer Kasif there and others. Meretz had Arab or Palestinian members of the Knesset. Labor had Ghalib Majadla at one point in time. Likud has Druze members. Even Israel Beitenu, which is a right-wing, as you mentioned earlier, Avraham, is kind of a Russian veterans, immigrants party. They have one of the members was Druze, for example. So there's a mishmash there. It's kind of pick and choose in a way. But Paul Sham, my dear colleague Paul Sham, is absolutely correct. I think that the whole conversation about the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, Jews and Arabs in Israel has taken a major hit in a response in the aftermath of October 7th. Yair Lapid, for example, makes that case and is being crucified for that. Certainly Naftali Bennett that we mentioned, the fact that he's unwilling, incapable of saying, I will sit with the Arab parties. And they all say the atmosphere has changed as opposed to the 2021, 2022 change government. Post October 7th, post the events in Gaza, the events in the West Bank and so on and so forth, it is much more difficult for Jews and Arabs, both Christians and Muslims, to come together. But perhaps Avraham Borg might be kind of the first one and might open the floodgates to create more of that. We'll see.
Yeah. We had in the former head of the now outgoing head of Hadash, Ayman Odeh,
Yeah,
a Palestinian citizen of Israel, something of a champion of Arab-Jewish partnership.
correct.
We just saw leadership elections in Hadash. We have a
Yeah,
new leader over there, Youssef Jabarin,
Jabarin. Yeah.
who's a lawyer by training. I wonder if you could give us your 2 cents into what Hadash under his leadership, what direction they might go in. You mentioned Ofer Kasif, who's the lone Jewish member of the Hadash list. Speak to that briefly, if you can.
Again, it's difficult because you have the parties and then you have the Arab or the Palestinian bloc, technical bloc. It's not clear, but Hadash was also always trying to signal that they're into Jewish-Arab collaboration, Jewish-Arab partnership. So I think that and again, Ayman Odeh was very, very forthcoming when he came out and said that he's trying to advocate for that with all his power. He was unsuccessful because he was unwilling, perhaps like Mansour Abbas, to cross the Rubicon and become part of a coalition or become much more engaged with coalition prospects of joining a coalition. So perhaps the fact that Mansour Abbas kind of changed Israeli politics back in 21, 22 may be impacting Jabarin and others in that bloc to be much more amenable to at least imagining joining a coalition where Naftali Bennett is a leading a leading figure at the same time.
Mhm. So perhaps on a hopeful note of the potential for future Arab-Jewish partnership, we can end it there. Thank you from me and Ilai for taking all my questions. Thank you to the audience for all the great questions as well. And I'll hand it over to Karen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avraham. Thank you, Ilai, for this wonderful conversation, important one. And we hope everyone here has enjoyed it. And just to note that on June the 7th, we'll be holding the last two sessions of our Israel Palestine virtual symposium. And that at the 11 a.m. Eastern Time session, we'll be looking at these elections and discussing them further with Avi Dabush and Laura Wharton, who are actively in politics. And in those intimate discussions that we have in our symposium, we'll be able to expand on today's conversation. So thank you very much. In the second session at 1:30 Eastern Time, we'll be discussing the moral challenges of state power, featuring Rabbi Leah Shaktiel and Rabbi Amichai Lavi, both people who are in Israel dealing with these issues. Please join us then. I want to end by saying also Eid Mubarak once again to everyone who is celebrating a blessed Eid. And if you're joining today's program, which has been free, our contributions are always welcome, and they enable us to deliver fantastic conversations like the one Avraham and Ilai just had today, informative information. So thank you. Please visit us at progressiveisrael.org. Check out our upcoming program. Read our emails that will be coming to you. And everyone have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avraham. Thank you so much, Karen, for having me for this conversation. Have a great day. Eid Mubarak. After Shavuot Sameach. Happy Shavuot. Take care, everybody.